The train lurched to a stop at Placerville, California station in the scorching heat of June 1878, and Olivia Vaughn pressed her gloved hand against the dusty window, wondering if the man waiting to marry her would be the answer to her prayers or the beginning of her worst nightmare. She had traveled 2,000 miles from Boston, carrying nothing but a worn leather trunk and a letter from Elijah Hastings, a merchant who claimed he needed a wife to help run his general store and provide companionship in this rough mining town, nestled in the Sierra Nevada foothills. The advertisement had seemed respectable enough, the correspondence proper and courteous, but now that she was here, with the California sun beating down mercilessly and the unfamiliar landscape stretching endlessly before her, doubt crept through her chest like winter frost. The other passengers began collecting their belongings, and Olivia smoothed down her navy traveling dress, tucking a stray auburn curl back into her practical bun. At 22, she had exhausted her options in Boston. Her parents had died 3 years ago from typhoid fever, leaving her with debts she could never repay on a seamstress's wages. Marriage to a stranger in the West had seemed like the only escape from a future of poverty or worse. She stepped down from the train car, her boots touching California soil for the first time, and the heat hit her like a wall. Back east, June meant pleasant warmth and flowering gardens, but here the sun seemed angry, the air dry and dusty, carrying the scent of pine and something else she could not quite identify. "Miss Vaughn," a nasal voice cut through her observations. Olivia turned to see a portly man in his 50s, his thinning hair slicked back with too much pomade, his vest straining over his considerable belly. He held a handkerchief to his sweating face and regarded her with small, calculating eyes that made her skin crawl. "I am Elijah Hastings. Welcome to Placerville." He did not smile, and his tone suggested she was a package he had ordered rather than a woman he intended to marry. Before she could respond, a commotion erupted near the freight car. Olivia glanced over to see several men struggling with a pair of horses that had been transported on the train. One horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, reared and kicked, clearly distressed by the journey and the unfamiliar surroundings. "Somebody get that damn animal under control," the station master shouted. A tall figure moved through the chaos with the kind of confidence that commanded attention without demanding it. The man was younger than most of the handlers, perhaps 25 or 26, wearing dusty chaps over worn denim, a dark hat pulled low over his face, and a red bandana tied loosely around his neck. He approached the frightened stallion with slow, deliberate movements, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Easy now," his voice carried across the platform, low and steady. "Nobody's going to hurt you." Olivia found herself watching despite Elijah's impatient huffing beside her. The cowboy moved closer to the horse, never breaking eye contact with the animal, speaking in a continuous murmur of reassuring words. The stallion's ears flicked forward, its wild eyes gradually calming. Within moments, the cowboy had a hand on the horse's neck, stroking gently, and the creature began to settle. "Miss Vaughn, we have matters to discuss," Elijah said tersely, grasping her elbow with fingers that dug in too firmly. She pulled away instinctively, and in that moment the cowboy looked up. Their eyes met across the dusty platform, and something passed between them that Olivia could not name. His eyes were the color of summer grass, startling against his sun-bronzed face, and they widened slightly as if he too felt that inexplicable jolt of recognition. "Miss Vaughn," Elijah's voice sharpened with displeasure. The cowboy's gaze shifted to Elijah, then back to her, and his jaw tightened. He touched the brim of his hat in a slight acknowledgement before returning his attention to the horse, but Olivia felt shaken, as if the ground beneath her had shifted. "Your trunk will be delivered to my store," Elijah informed her, already steering her toward a wagon. "We will be married tomorrow morning. The Reverend has agreed to perform the ceremony at 10 o'clock. Tonight you will stay with Mrs. Henderson, the boarding house keeper. She will ensure everything is proper. Tomorrow," Olivia's voice came out higher than intended, "but I just arrived. Surely we should take some time to become acquainted." Elijah's laugh was short and humorless. "We have corresponded for 3 months. That is sufficient. I need a wife to manage my household and assist in the store. The sooner we proceed, the better." Everything in Olivia's being screamed that this was wrong, but what choice did she have? She had spent her last dollars on the train ticket. She had no family, no means of supporting herself, and no way back to Boston, even if she wanted to return to that life of grinding poverty. The wagon ride through Placerville revealed a bustling town that had clearly prospered from the gold rush, though those glory days were now behind it. The main street was lined with wooden buildings, some quite substantial, including hotels, saloons, shops, and the general store that bore the name Hastings Mercantile in faded letters. Miners still worked claims in the surrounding hills, but the town had evolved into a supply hub for the smaller settlements scattered throughout the Sierra Nevada. Mrs. Henderson turned out to be a weathered woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She showed Olivia to a small but clean room at the boarding house and brought her a basin of water and a simple supper of bread, cheese, and dried apples. "You look troubled, child," Mrs. Henderson said, settling into the room's single chair while Olivia sat on the edge of the narrow bed. Olivia considered denying it, but something about the older woman's direct gaze made her want to be honest. "I am frightened," she admitted softly. "Mr. Hastings is not what I expected." "He is a hard man," Mrs. Henderson said carefully. "Not cruel, perhaps, but not warm either. His first wife died 5 years ago. She was not happy." The words settled over Olivia like a shroud. "Why did you tell me this?" "Because you deserve to know what you are choosing." Mrs. Henderson leaned forward. "A mail-order bride has few options, I understand that. But you have until tomorrow morning. That gives you tonight to be very certain." After Mrs. Henderson left, Olivia could not eat. She moved to the window and looked out over the darkening town. Lanterns were being lit in windows, and the sounds of a piano drifted from one of the saloons. Somewhere out there was the cowboy with the green eyes, and she found herself wondering who he was, where he had learned to gentle a frightened horse with such patience, and why the brief moment their eyes had met felt more significant than 3 months of letters from the man she was supposed to marry. She barely slept that night. When dawn broke, painting the California sky in shades of pink and gold, Olivia rose and dressed in her best gown, a pale blue cotton with small pearl buttons. She braided her hair and wound it into a coronet, studying her reflection in the small mirror. Her face was pale, shadows under her hazel eyes betraying her sleepless night. At 9 o'clock, Mrs. Henderson knocked on her door. "Mr. Hastings is downstairs." Olivia's hands trembled as she reached for her gloves, but before she could put them on, raised voices erupted from below. She heard Elijah's nasal tone, angry and sharp, and then another voice, deeper and calmer but with an edge of steel underneath. She opened her door and moved to the top of the stairs, Mrs. Henderson close behind her. In the boarding house's small parlor, Elijah stood toe to toe with the cowboy from the train station. In the morning light streaming through the windows, Olivia could see him more clearly. He was tall and lean, with dark brown hair that curled slightly at his collar, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, and those remarkable green eyes currently fixed on Elijah with barely concealed contempt. "This is none of your concern, Cain," Elijah spat. "The woman is here to marry me." "That is her choice to make," the cowboy Cain replied evenly, "but she should make it knowing all the facts." "What facts?" Elijah's face was turning an alarming shade of red. "You have no right to interfere." "I have every right to speak the truth." Cain's voice remained steady. "Your first wife lived a miserable existence. The whole town knew it. You worked her to exhaustion in that store, never a kind word, never a moment's rest. When she fell ill, you waited 3 days before calling the doctor because you did not want to pay his fee. By then, it was too late." "She was weak," Elijah said coldly. "I need a wife with a stronger constitution." "You need a servant you do not have to pay," Cain corrected. "That is not a marriage." Olivia felt frozen at the top of the stairs, her heart hammering. Mrs. Henderson touched her shoulder gently. Elijah finally noticed her standing there. "Miss Vaughn, come down at once. We are leaving." But Cain had turned too, and once again their eyes met. This time the impact was even stronger. She saw concern in his face and something else, something that made her breath catch. "Miss Vaughn," Cain said quietly, never breaking eye contact with her, "you do not have to do this. There are other choices." "She has no choices," Elijah snapped. "She is penniless and alone, 2,000 miles from home. She will marry me as agreed." Olivia found her voice, though it shook. "Why do you care?" she asked Cain. "You do not know me." Cain removed his hat, holding it in both hands. "Maybe I do not know your name until yesterday, but when I saw you on that platform and our eyes met, I felt something I never felt before. I know it sounds mad. I know we are strangers. But Miss Vaughn, I also know that I could not let you walk into a life of misery without at least trying to offer you another path." "Another path," she whispered. "What path? I have no money, no skills beyond sewing, and no prospects. You could marry me instead." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Elijah sputtered with outrage, but Olivia heard nothing except the rushing of blood in her ears. This was insanity. This man was a complete stranger, and yet the offer felt more right than anything had in the past 3 years. "You are mad," Elijah finally managed. "She came here to marry me. We have a contract." "A contract she signed believing you to be an honest man," Cain said. "If she had known the truth, she might have made a different choice. I am giving her that option now." Olivia slowly descended the stairs, her legs unsteady. Both men watched her, Elijah with possessive anger, Cain with something that looked like hope mixed with uncertainty. "Tell me your full name," she said to Cain. "Cain Jefferson. I have a ranch about 5 miles outside of town, up in the foothills. It is not much yet, just a cabin and a barn, but I have good land and a small herd of cattle. I have been building it for 3 years, ever since I came west from Missouri. I am 26 years old, and I give you my word that I would treat you with respect and kindness." "This is preposterous," Elijah interrupted. "Miss Vaughn, I demand you honor our agreement." Olivia looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the truth in what Cain had said. Elijah viewed her as property, a solution to his problems, nothing more. His small eyes held no warmth, no affection, not even curiosity about who she was beyond her utility to him. Then she looked at Cain Jefferson. She saw a man who had risked confrontation and social disapproval to offer her a choice. She saw someone who gentled frightened horses with patience, and who spoke of feeling something inexplicable when their eyes met, something she had felt too and been afraid to acknowledge. "I am sorry, Mr. Hastings," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I cannot marry you." The satisfaction on Cain's face was immediate, but he quickly schooled his expression. Elijah, however, exploded with fury. "You cannot refuse. I paid for your train ticket." "I will repay you," Olivia said, though she had no idea how. "But I will not marry a man who views me as a servant rather than a partner." "You will regret this," Elijah hissed. "You will end up on the streets or worse. Do not come begging to me when this fool cannot provide for you." "I can provide just fine," Cain said quietly, but there was steel in his voice now. "And if you speak about Miss Vaughn in that manner again, we will have more than words between us." Elijah looked between them, his face twisted with rage and humiliation, then turned and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. In the sudden silence, Olivia became acutely aware that she had just made a decision that was either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish, and she was not sure which. Her legs gave out, and she sank onto the nearest chair. Cain knelt beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "Are you all right?" "I do not know," she answered honestly. "I think I must be losing my mind. I just refused to marry one stranger in favor of another stranger, and I have no idea if I made the right choice." Mrs. Henderson had descended the stairs and now moved to pour Olivia a glass of water from the pitcher on the side table. "You made a choice from your heart instead of from desperation," the older woman said. "That takes courage." Cain stood, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that suggested he was nearly as overwhelmed as Olivia felt. "I should explain myself better. Miss Vaughn, I do not expect anything from you. If you want, we can have a marriage in name only, just to protect your reputation. You can have your own room at the ranch, and I will not press you for anything you are not willing to give. I just wanted to offer you a chance at something better than what Hastings could provide." Olivia studied him. "Why would you do that?" "You could find a wife through proper courtship, someone you actually know." Cain's expression turned wry. "There are not many eligible women in these parts, and those who are here have their pick of men. But that is not really the reason. The truth is, when I saw you yesterday, when our eyes met, I felt like I already knew you somehow. Like I had been waiting for you without realizing it. I know that sounds foolish." "It does not sound foolish," Olivia said softly, because she had felt it too, that impossible sense of recognition. "But it is mad to marry based on such a feeling." "Maybe," Cain agreed. "Or maybe sometimes we have to trust what we feel even when it does not make logical sense. But I am not asking you to decide right now. Stay here at the boarding house for a few days. Let me court you properly. Let us get to know each other. Then, if you still want to accept my offer, we can marry. If not, I will help you find a position somewhere, a seamstress shop perhaps, if that is what you want." It was a generous offer, more generous than she had any right to expect. Olivia looked at Mrs. Henderson, who nodded approvingly. "That seems like a sensible plan," the older woman said. "I can extend your room here for a week. That should give you both time to make a proper decision." Over the next several days, Cain came to call every afternoon. They would sit in Mrs. Henderson's parlor, with the boarding house keeper serving as chaperone, and they would talk. Olivia learned that Cain had grown up on a small farm in Missouri, the youngest of 4 brothers. His father had died when he was 15, and his mother had remarried a man who made it clear there was not room for all the sons. Cain's older brothers had established lives of their own, and at 23, he had decided to head west to build something of his own. "I tried my hand at mining for a while," he told her, "but I am a rancher at heart. I saved enough to buy land and a few head of cattle. It is hard work, but it is mine. Every fence post I set, every acre I clear, it means something." In turn, Olivia told him about her life in Boston, about her parents who had run a small bookshop until their deaths, about the debts she had inherited and the struggle to survive on a seamstress's meager wages. "I was fortunate to have work at all," she said. "But the hours were long. the pay barely enough to afford a room in a boarding house far worse than this one, and I could see my future stretching ahead with no hope of anything better. When I saw Mr. Hastings's advertisement, it seemed like providence. "I am glad you came west," Kane said, his green eyes warm. "Even if the circumstances were not what you expected, this country is hard, but it is also full of possibility. People can become something more than what they were born to be." On the third day, Kane invited Olivia to ride out to see his ranch, with Mrs. Henderson accompanying them as chaperone. The older woman settled into the wagon bed with remarkable spryness, while Kane helped Olivia onto the bench seat beside him. His hands were strong but gentle, and Olivia found herself very aware of his presence next to her as they drove out of town. The road climbed into the foothills, winding through groves of oak and pine. The landscape was beautiful in a way entirely different from back east, wilder and more open, with dramatic vistas of rolling hills covered in golden grass and darker patches of forest. Hawks circled overhead, and once they spotted a small herd of deer grazing in a meadow. Kane's ranch occupied a valley between two hills, with a creek running through it that provided year-round water. The cabin was simple but well-built, constructed of logs chinked with mud, with a stone chimney and a covered porch. Nearby stood a sturdy barn and several corrals where a dozen cattle grazed contentedly. "It is not fancy," Kane said, and Olivia could hear the uncertainty in his voice, as if her opinion mattered deeply to him. "It is beautiful," she said honestly. "You built all of this yourself, most of it." "I had help with the barn raising from some neighbors. That is how it works out here. We help each other when needed." He helped her down from the wagon, and she noticed he held her hand a moment longer than necessary, his eyes searching hers. "Mrs. Henderson tactfully announced she needed to stretch her legs and wandered off toward the creek, giving them a measure of privacy while still remaining in sight. Kane showed Olivia the cabin's interior. It was spare but clean, with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a good iron stove, a table and chairs Kane had built himself, and a single bedroom with a bed frame he had constructed from hewn logs. A colorful quilt covered the bed, somewhat incongruous with the otherwise masculine space. "My mother made that," Kane said, following her gaze. "She sent it with me when I left home, said every house needs something beautiful in it." Olivia ran her hand over the quilt, feeling the careful stitches. "She must have loved you very much." "She did. She died 2 years ago, a fever. By the time I got the letter and made the journey back to Missouri, she had already been buried for 3 weeks. His voice was rough with old grief. "I never got to say goodbye." Without thinking, Olivia reached out and touched his arm. "I understand that pain. When my parents died, I was so consumed with trying to settle their debts and keep myself fed that I did not have time to properly grieve. Sometimes I feel guilty about that." Kane covered her hand with his own. "They would not want you to feel guilty. They would want you to live to find happiness." "Is that what you think your mother would want for you?" "Yes," he said simply. "She would have liked you." Over the next few days, Kane continued his courtship with a determination that was both endearing and persuasive. He brought Olivia wildflowers picked from the meadows around his ranch. He took her to the town's small restaurant for dinner, where the other patrons stared curiously at the newcomer, who had refused Elijah Hastings, and was now being courted by Kane Jefferson. He introduced her to his friends, including a young couple, Thomas and Mary Prescott, who owned the neighboring ranch and whose obvious affection for each other gave Olivia a glimpse of what a happy marriage could be. "Kane is a good man," Mary told Olivia one afternoon when the men were outside looking at a new horse Thomas had purchased. "One of the best I have known. He helped us when we first arrived, taught Thomas everything he knows about ranching out here. He does not talk much about his feelings, but I can see how he looks at you. That man is already half in love." The words made Olivia's heart race, because the truth was, she was falling for Kane too. It was happening faster than seemed possible, but every conversation revealed more depth to his character. He was thoughtful and kind, with a dry sense of humor that surprised her into laughter. He was honest to a fault, hardworking, and yet he also had a gentle soul that showed itself in how he treated his animals and how he spoke about building a life that mattered. On the 7th evening, Kane asked Olivia to take a walk with him. They strolled through Placerville as the sun set, painting the wooden buildings in shades of orange and gold. He led her to a small park area at the edge of town, where a massive oak tree provided shade. "I know we agreed to take a week," Kane said, turning to face her. "But I need to be honest with you, Olivia. I do not want a marriage in name only. I want a real marriage, a real partnership. I want to build a life with you, to wake up beside you every morning, to face whatever challenges come our way together. I know it is fast, and I know we still have a lot to learn about each other, but I am certain about this. I am certain about you." Olivia's breath caught. In the fading light, his green eyes were intense, searching her face as if trying to read her soul. "I am frightened," she admitted. "What if we are wrong? What if this feeling between us fades?" Kane reached out and took both her hands in his. "Then we will work on it. We will fight for it. But Olivia, I do not think this feeling is going to fade. I think it is just the beginning." She looked up at him, at this man who had upended her plans and offered her something she had never expected, a chance at genuine love. "I feel it too," she whispered. "From the moment I saw you with that horse, the way you were so patient and gentle, I felt something shift inside me. I tried to tell myself it was foolish, that I was just desperate to avoid marrying Mr. Hastings, but it was more than that. It is more than that." Kane's face transformed with a smile that stole her breath. "Is that a yes?" "Yes," she said, and suddenly she was laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you. A real marriage." He pulled her into his arms, and Olivia went willingly, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. He smelled of leather and pine and something essentially him, and she felt safer than she had in years. "We will get married tomorrow," Kane said into her hair. "If that is acceptable to you, I do not want to wait any longer." "Tomorrow," she agreed, and when he tipped her face up and kissed her for the first time, it felt like coming home. They were married the next morning by the same reverend who would have married Olivia to Elijah Hastings. Kane wore his best shirt and a string tie, his hair neatly combed, his eyes never leaving Olivia as she walked toward him in her blue dress with a crown of wildflowers in her hair, courtesy of Mary Prescott. Mrs. Henderson and the Prescotts served as witnesses, and when the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, Kane's kiss was gentle but held a promise of deeper passion to come. The Prescotts hosted a small celebration dinner at their ranch, but by early evening, Kane and Olivia were alone, riding in the wagon back to their home. Olivia felt her nerves building as they drew closer. She had never been with a man, and while she understood the basic mechanics of the marriage bed, the reality of it was daunting. Kane seemed to sense her tension. As they entered the cabin, he lit the oil lamps and then turned to her. "We do not have to rush anything," he said gently. "I know this is all new and overwhelming," but Olivia stepped closer to him, her heart hammering. "I want this," she said. "I want you. I am just nervous." Kane cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "So am I," he admitted, which surprised her. "I have never been with anyone I cared about the way I care about you. I want this to be right." He kissed her then, and it started gentle but quickly deepened as 3 months of longing and a week of restrained courtship gave way to genuine need. Cain was patient, careful, guiding her through each step, and when they finally came together in the bed with his mother's quilt beneath them, Olivia felt not just physical pleasure but an emotional connection that brought tears to her eyes. Afterwards, lying in Cain's arms with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow, she felt profoundly grateful for that moment on the train platform when their eyes had met. It seemed impossible that a single glance could change the course of a life, but here was the proof. "What are you thinking?" Cain asked, his fingers trailing through her unbound hair. "That I am glad I came west," she said. "That I am glad the train brought me here, even if it was to marry a stranger who turned out not to be a stranger at all." Cain tightened his arms around her. "Not a stranger long," he murmured. "Never a stranger again." The next weeks fell into a pattern that felt both new and timeless. Olivia threw herself into making the cabin a home, sewing curtains from fabric Cain brought back from town, planting a kitchen garden near the creek, learning to cook on the iron stove. Cain taught her to ride, first on his gentle mare, and watching his patient instruction, she fell more deeply in love with him each day. The work was harder than anything she had done in Boston, but it was also more satisfying. Here, she could see the direct results of her labor: vegetables sprouting in neat rows, a cabin that gleamed with cleanliness, meals that brought a smile to Cain's face. And every night she fell asleep in her husband's arms, marveling at how safe and cherished she felt. They learned each other's rhythms and habits. Cain rose before dawn, always careful not to wake her, though she often stirred anyway and watched him dress in the early light, admiring the lean strength of his body. He would kiss her forehead before heading out to tend the cattle, and she would rise to make breakfast, timing it so that hot coffee and eggs were ready when he came back in. Evenings were her favorite time. After supper, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the hills, Cain's arm around her shoulders, talking about their day or their dreams for the future, or sometimes not talking at all, just being together in comfortable silence. One evening about a month after their wedding, as they sat watching the stars emerge, Olivia said, "I have been thinking about expanding the garden. Mary told me there is a good market in town for fresh vegetables. We could sell the surplus and make some extra money." Cain looked at her with surprise and approval. "That is a smart idea. We could use the income to buy more cattle next spring. And maybe start building a bigger house," Olivia added. "This cabin is perfect for now, but if we have children someday, we will need more room." "Children," Cain repeated, his voice soft. He turned to look at her fully. "You want children with me?" "Of course I do," Olivia said, surprised by the emotion in his question. "Do you not want them?" "I want everything with you," he said fiercely. "Sometimes I still cannot believe this is real, that you are really my wife, that this life is truly mine." She kissed him then, there on the porch under the emerging stars, and the kiss led to them stumbling inside and falling into bed, their lovemaking urgent and profound. As summer deepened into fall, their life together deepened as well. Olivia's garden flourished, and she did indeed sell vegetables in town, building a small but loyal customer base. With her earnings and Cain's income from selling several head of cattle, they began saving for improvements to the ranch. But their happiness was not without challenges. In late September, an early cold snap threatened the last of the garden harvest. Olivia worked frantically to pick everything that could be saved, while Cain worked to ensure the cattle had adequate shelter. They fell into bed exhausted that night, but there was satisfaction in knowing they had met the challenge together. Then in October, A rattlesnake spooked Kane's horse while he was mending a fence line. The horse threw him, and he landed hard enough to break 2 ribs. Olivia heard his shout and came running from the cabin to find him struggling to breathe, his face white with pain. Terror seized her as she helped him back to the house, terrified she would lose him so soon after finding him. The doctor from town confirmed the broken ribs and instructed strict rest, which Kane chafed against. For 2 weeks, Olivia had to do both his work and hers, rising before dawn to tend the cattle, then rushing back to care for Kane and keep the household running. She was exhausted beyond measure, but she never complained, and her determination to keep everything going impressed Kane deeply. "I do not deserve you," he said one evening as she brought him supper in bed, her face drawn with fatigue. "Nonsense," she replied briskly. "We are partners. When one falls, the other stands strong. That is what marriage means." By the time Kane was fully recovered, winter was approaching. They prepared for it together, stocking the cabin with supplies, ensuring the barn was tight against the cold, and bringing the cattle down from the higher pastures. The first snow fell in mid-November, blanketing the ranch in white silence. Olivia had never experienced anything like a Sierra Nevada winter. The snow piled higher than she had imagined possible, and there were days when they could not leave the cabin at all. But those forced days inside became some of her most cherished memories. She and Kane would sit by the fire, talking for hours, or Kane would play the harmonica he had brought from Missouri, filling the cabin with melancholy, beautiful music. On Christmas Eve, Kane surprised her with a gift, a beautifully carved wooden box he had made during the long evenings. "It is for your sewing things," he explained as she ran her fingers over the smooth wood, marveling at the delicate flowers he had carved into the lid. "I know you miss your work sometimes." Tears sprang to her eyes because he was right. She did miss the creative satisfaction of sewing, the feel of fabric under her fingers, the pleasure of making something beautiful. "How did you know?" "I pay attention," he said simply. "You are my wife. Of course I notice what makes you happy." "You make me happy," she said, setting the box aside to throw her arms around him. "You make me happier than I ever thought possible." Their first Christmas together was simple, just the two of them alone in the cabin with the snow falling steadily outside, but it was perfect. They exchanged small gifts, ate a special meal Olivia had prepared, and made love in front of the fireplace, the flames casting dancing shadows on their joined bodies. As winter slowly gave way to spring, Olivia realized her monthly courses had not come. At first, she told herself it was stress, or the change in climate, or any of a dozen other explanations. But by March, she could no longer deny the truth. She was pregnant. She chose to tell Kane on a Sunday afternoon when he came in from checking on the new calves. He was smiling, full of news about how well the herd was doing, and she let him talk, loving the animation in his face before she finally interrupted. "Kane, I have something to tell you." He must have heard something in her voice because he immediately sobered, moving to her side. "What is it?" "Are you all right?" "I am fine," she assured him quickly. "Better than fine. I am pregnant." The expression that crossed his face was so full of wonder and joy that it made her heart clench. "Pregnant?" he repeated as if he could not quite believe it. "You are sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. I have missed 2 courses and I have been feeling ill in the mornings." Kane dropped to his knees beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby." Then his expression turned concerned. "Are you happy about this?" "I know it is sooner than we discussed." "I am happy," Olivia said, surprised to find it was completely true. 6 months ago, she had been alone and desperate in Boston. Now she was carrying the child of a man she loved beyond measure in a home they had built together. I am so happy I could cry. Then cry, Kane said, pulling her into his arms. I am fairly close to crying myself. True to his word, his eyes were suspiciously bright as he held her, one hand coming to rest protectively over her still flat stomach. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through spring and into summer. Olivia continued working in her garden, though Kane fussed over her constantly, worried she was doing too much. Mary Prescott became a valued friend and advisor, having gone through 2 pregnancies herself and full of practical advice. As Olivia's belly swelled with their child, Kane would spend evenings with his hand resting on it, marveling at every movement. He is strong, he would say. Or she, Olivia would correct with amusement. Boy or girl, as long as the baby is healthy and you are safe, Kane would reply, his protectiveness touching even as it sometimes overwhelmed her. In late September, as the aspens began turning gold on the hillsides, Olivia went into labor. Kane rode frantically to town to fetch the doctor and Mrs. Henderson, who had delivered more babies than anyone in the county. Through the long hours of labor, Kane stayed by her side, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement even as his own face was white with fear. Finally, as dawn broke over the mountains, their son entered the world with a lusty cry. Mrs. Henderson placed the squalling, red-faced infant in Olivia's arms, and she looked down at him in wonder. He is perfect, she breathed. Kane, who had been stoic through the entire ordeal, broke down at the sight of his son. Tears streamed down his face as he gently touched the baby's tiny hand, which immediately grasped his finger with surprising strength. What should we name him? Olivia asked. Kane thought for a moment. William, he said, after my father, if that is acceptable to you. William Jefferson, Olivia said, testing the name. It is perfect. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. William was a demanding baby, crying often and sleeping irregularly. But Kane proved to be a devoted father, rising in the night to walk the floors with his son so Olivia could rest, changing nappies without complaint, his face soft with an expression Olivia had never seen before. I never knew I could love this much, he told her one night as they stood over William's cradle, watching their son sleep. I love you more than I thought possible, and now there is this little person who is part of both of us, and my heart feels like it might burst. Olivia leaned against him, bone-tired but content. I know exactly what you mean. As William grew from an infant into a curious, active toddler, the ranch prospered. Kane's careful management and hard work paid off in a healthy, expanding herd. Olivia's garden continued to provide both food for their table and income from sales. They began construction on a new, larger house, working on it whenever time and money allowed. It was slow progress, but steady. They faced setbacks, of course. A drought the summer William turned to reduced their income and forced them to sell more cattle than they wanted. A bout of influenza swept through the county and they all fell ill, though mercifully they recovered. But each challenge seemed to make their marriage stronger, their partnership more solid. When William was 3, Olivia discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news was less of a surprise but no less welcome. Kane hoped for a daughter, admitting he liked the idea of a little girl with her mother's auburn hair and hazel eyes. As long as the baby is healthy, Olivia said, echoing his words from her first pregnancy. Their daughter was born on a mild spring evening, her arrival much easier than William's had been. Kane got his wish. She had a cap of auburn curls, and when she opened her eyes, they were hazel flecked with green. "She is going to be beautiful like her mother," Kane said, cradling his daughter with the ease of an experienced father now. They named her Rose after Olivia's mother, and William was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to help care for her. The cabin grew crowded with 4 of them, but the new house was nearly complete. A spacious structure with a real parlor, a proper kitchen, 3 bedrooms, and a porch that wrapped around 2 sides. They moved in when Rose was 6 months old, and Olivia stood in the center of the parlor, looking around at the home they had built, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. The furniture was simple but well made, much of it constructed by Kane's own hands. Curtains she had sewn herself hung at the windows. William's toys were scattered in the corner. Rose slept peacefully in a cradle Kane had carved with the same care he had put into Olivia's sewing box years ago. Kane came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking?" "That I am the luckiest woman alive," she said honestly. 5 years ago, I stepped off a train, terrified and alone, believing I was coming here to marry a man who would never truly love me. Instead, I found you. Kane turned her to face him. "I am the lucky one. You took a chance on me, a cowboy you had just met, with nothing to offer but a half-built ranch and a feeling that we belonged together." "That feeling was right," Olivia said, reaching up to touch his face. The years had added small lines around his eyes, and there was a scar on his chin from a ranching accident, but to her, he was the most handsome man in the world. More importantly, he was kind and loving, a wonderful father and a partner who treated her as an equal. "That feeling was very right," Kane agreed, and kissed her as the sun set outside their new home, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joy and challenge. William grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved helping his father with the ranch work. Rose was all energy and laughter, keeping Olivia constantly busy. The ranch continued to expand, and Kane took on a hired hand, a young man named Patrick who proved both hardworking and reliable. When William was 8 and Rose was 5, Olivia discovered she was pregnant once more. This pregnancy was harder than the previous 2, leaving her exhausted and sick for months. Kane worried constantly, hovering over her until she finally snapped at him to give her some space. He retreated, chastened, and she immediately felt guilty. "I am sorry," she said that evening. "I should not have spoken harshly. I know you are worried." "I am terrified," Kane admitted. "The doctor said you are having a harder time because you are older now. What if something goes wrong?" "I cannot lose you, Olivia, I cannot." She took his hand and placed it on her swollen belly. "I am going to be fine. We are going to be fine. Have faith." The baby, another boy they named James, arrived safely in early winter. The birth was difficult, and the doctor told them quietly that Olivia should not have more children. The risk was too great. Kane agreed immediately, more concerned with his wife's health than with expanding their family further. 3 children is a blessing," he told Olivia as she recovered. 3 healthy children and a wife I adore. I am grateful for what we have." James proved to be a happy, easy baby, so different from William's difficult infancy that they sometimes joked he was trying to make up for his brother. He laughed easily, slept well, and seemed content to observe the world with curious blue eyes. As the children grew, the ranch became increasingly prosperous. Kane's reputation as an honest dealer and skilled rancher spread, and he was often asked to advise others starting their own operations. Olivia's garden had expanded to include fruit trees and berry bushes, and she had begun preserving and selling jams that became sought after throughout the county. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Kane took Olivia back to the spot in Placerville where he had first proposed, under the great oak tree. The children were spending the night with the Prescotts, giving them a rare evening alone. 10 years, Kane said, pulling Olivia close as they stood under the spreading branches. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like I have known you my whole life. I feel the same, Olivia said. Do you remember what you said to me that evening? That you wanted a real marriage, a real partnership. I remember every word, Kane said. I meant them all. We have built that, Olivia said. Against all odds, despite starting as strangers, we have built something real and lasting. Kane produced a small box from his pocket. Inside was a delicate gold locket. I wanted to give you something special. I know we started without any of the traditional courtship or engagement, and I never properly gave you jewelry. Olivia opened the locket to find tiny photographs of their 3 children on one side and a lock of hair, clearly from their wedding day, on the other. Tears sprang to her eyes. It is beautiful. But Kane, you have given me so much more than jewelry. You have given me a home, a family, a life I never dreamed possible. You gave me the same, Kane said, fastening the locket around her neck. You took a chance on a stranger because you felt something you could not explain. That took courage, or madness, Olivia said with a laugh. Maybe both, Kane agreed. But I am grateful every day that you made that choice, that you looked at me and decided maybe I was not such a stranger after all. Not a stranger long, Olivia murmured, the words that had become their private promise to each other. They kissed under the oak tree as the stars emerged overhead, and Olivia felt the same flutter in her heart she had felt that first day on the train platform. Some things, it seemed, did not fade with time but only grew stronger. The next decade brought its own adventures and trials. William grew into a young man who shared his father's love of ranching and his mother's thoughtful nature. At 18, he announced his intention to start his own small operation on land Kane helped him purchase. Rose became a spirited young woman who showed a talent for teaching, eventually taking a position at the Placerville schoolhouse. James, still only 10, showed signs of being the most adventurous of the 3, constantly exploring the hills and bringing home interesting rocks, unusual plants, and once, to his mother's horror, a baby raccoon he wanted to keep as a pet. Kane and Olivia aged together, their love deepening with each passing year. They developed the comfortable rhythms of a long marriage, able to communicate with a glance, falling into familiar patterns that brought comfort rather than boredom. Kane's hair turned silver at the temples, and lines deepened around his eyes, but Olivia thought he had only grown more handsome. She herself had gained a few pounds and her auburn hair showed streaks of gray, but when Kane looked at her, his eyes still held the same warmth and desire they always had. "You are as beautiful as the day I first saw you," he would tell her, and she knew he meant it. They celebrated their 20th anniversary with a party that filled their home with friends and neighbors, their children and the Prescotts' grown children, and the warmth of a community they had become integral parts of. As Olivia looked around at the gathered crowd, she marveled at how far they had come from that uncertain meeting at the train station. Mrs. Henderson, now in her 80s and still sharp as ever, pulled Olivia aside. "You made the right choice that day," she said. "I have seen a lot of marriages in my time, and yours is one of the true loves." "I was terrified," Olivia admitted. "I thought I was making the worst mistake of my life." "But you trusted your heart," Mrs. Henderson said. "That is what made the difference." That night, after everyone had gone and the house was quiet, Kane and Olivia sat on their porch, watching the stars just as they had done countless times before. 20 years, Kane said. "If I could go back and tell that young cowboy at the train station what his life would become, I do not think he would believe me." "What would you tell him?" Olivia asked. Kane thought for a moment. I would tell him that the woman getting off the train is about to change his life in ways he cannot imagine. That having the courage to approach her, to offer her another choice, will lead to more happiness than he has any right to expect. I would tell him that marriage is work, but it is the best work he will ever do. And I would tell him to cherish every moment, because life passes faster than you think. Olivia rested her head on his shoulder. I would tell that scared young woman on the train to trust her instincts. That the cowboy with the green eyes is everything she has been hoping for without knowing it. That the train brought her west to marry a stranger, but when their eyes meet, she should know in her heart that maybe he is not such a stranger after all. Not a stranger long, Kane said softly, and kissed the top of her head. As they sat together in the comfortable silence of long companionship, Olivia reflected on the journey that had brought them here. She had come west as a desperate woman with no options, believing she was entering a practical arrangement that would provide security but little else. Instead, she had found a love story more romantic than anything she had read in her parents' bookshop. It had not always been easy. There had been hard winters and dry summers, sick children and injured livestock, financial worries and exhausting work. But through it all, they had faced everything together, partners in the truest sense. Kane had kept his promise to treat her with respect and kindness, and somewhere along the way, respect and kindness had blossomed into a love that sustained them both. 25 years after that fateful day at the train station, Olivia woke one morning to find Kane had not risen before her as usual. She turned to find him watching her with a soft smile. "Are you feeling all right?" she asked, concerned. He was 61 now, still strong and capable, but the years of hard physical labor had taken their toll. "I am perfect," he said. "I just wanted to lie here and watch you sleep. Do you know you still take my breath away?" Olivia laughed. "I am an old woman with gray hair and wrinkles." "You are my wife," Kane corrected. "And you are beautiful." He reached out to touch her face. "I was just lying here thinking about that day at the train station. I saw you through the window before you even stepped off the train, and something in my chest tightened. I told myself I was being foolish, that love at first sight was not real. But then you stepped down and our eyes met, and I knew." "Knew what?" Olivia asked softly. "That my life had just changed, that you were meant to be mine and I was meant to be yours. That I had been waiting for you without even knowing it." "I felt it too," Olivia admitted. "It terrified me. But you were brave enough to choose love over security," Kane said. "That is one of the many reasons I adore you." They lay there together as morning light filled the bedroom. No need for further words, content in each other's presence. This, Olivia thought, was the real gift of a long marriage. Not just the passion of youth, though they had shared that, but the deep comfort of being truly known and loved anyway. William was running the main ranch now, with Kane serving more as an advisor than the primary rancher. Rose had married a good man, a teacher like herself, and they had 2 children who adored their grandparents. James, now 15, was showing signs of wanting to pursue law rather than ranching, which delighted Olivia even as it bemused Kane. "I raised a son who would rather read law books than mend fences," Kane said with mock dismay. "How did that happen?" "You raised a son who knows he has choices," Olivia corrected. "You showed him that in America, especially out west, a man can become whatever he has the courage to pursue. You taught him that by example." On a crisp October morning, 30 years after Olivia had arrived in Placerville, she and Kane rode up into the hills to a spot they had discovered years ago, a meadow with a view that stretched for miles. The aspens were golden, shimmering in the breeze, and the air smelled of pine and wood smoke from distant cabins. They spread a blanket and sat together, sharing a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and apples, the kind of meal they had eaten countless times over the years. Kane's hands were weathered and scarred from decades of work, and he moved more stiffly than he once had, but his green eyes were as bright as ever when he looked at her. "If you could do it all again," Kane asked, "would you make the same choice? Would you reject Hastings and take a chance on a stranger?" Olivia did not hesitate, without question, every time, in every lifetime, even knowing how hard it would be sometimes. "Especially knowing that," Olivia said, "the hard times made us stronger. They taught us what we are capable of, both individually and together. And the good times, Kane, the good times have been extraordinary." Kane pulled her close, and they sat wrapped in each other's arms, looking out over the land they had built a life on. In the distance, smoke rose from the chimney of William's house. Further away, the town of Placerville spread across the foothills, larger and more prosperous than it had been when Olivia first arrived. "I keep thinking about that day," Kane said. "I was at the station to pick up supplies and I saw the train pull in. I was not even supposed to be there that exact moment, but my horse had thrown a shoe and I had to wait while the blacksmith fixed it. If not for that delay, I would have missed seeing you arrive. We never would have met." "I like to think we would have found each other somehow," Olivia said. "Maybe that is foolish romanticism, but I believe some people are meant to be together." "Then I am grateful for the thrown horseshoe," Kane said, "and for having the courage to interfere when Hastings tried to claim you. And most of all, I am grateful that you saw something in me worth trusting." "I saw a man who was gentle with a frightened animal," Olivia said. "I saw kindness and patience and strength. I saw someone I could build a life with, even if I did not consciously realize it at the time." They stayed in the meadow until the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple. As they rode back down to the ranch, Olivia felt profoundly at peace. She had lived a good life, a full life, richer than she ever could have imagined as that frightened young woman stepping off the train. 32 years after their wedding, Kane fell ill. It started as a cough that would not clear, and despite Olivia's increasingly frantic ministrations, he grew weaker. The doctor confirmed what they both feared, a cancer in his lungs, too advanced to treat. "How long?" Kane asked with characteristic directness. "Months, perhaps," the doctor said gently. "I am sorry." Kane took the news with a stoicism that broke Olivia's heart even as she admired his courage. That night, lying in their bed, she wept against his chest. "I cannot lose you," she said. "I do not know how to exist without you." "You will," Kane said, stroking her hair. "You are the strongest person I know. You survived losing your parents, traveled across a continent to an unknown future, built a new life in a hard land. You will survive this too." "I do not want to," Olivia said fiercely. "I know," Kane said softly. "But you will because you have to, for our children and grandchildren, for all the life that is still ahead of you. All I want is more time with you." "Me too," Kane admitted, and his voice cracked for the first time. "God, Olivia, I am not ready. I want more years with you. I want to see James practice law, to watch more grandchildren grow up, to sit on our porch and watch sunsets until we are both too old to walk out there. I want everything I am not going to get." They held each other and wept together, grieving the future that was being stolen from them. But as the weeks passed, Kane's acceptance grew, and Olivia tried to match his courage. Their children came to visit, bringing grandchildren who climbed carefully into bed with their grandfather to hear his stories. Friends stopped by to share memories and say goodbye. The Prescotts, now elderly themselves, spent hours reminiscing about the early days one evening, As fall gave way to winter and the first snow began to fall, Kane asked Olivia to help him out to the porch. She bundled him in blankets and they sat together, watching the snow drift down in the lamplight. "Tell me about that day," Kane said. "The day you arrived. Tell me what you were thinking when you saw me." Olivia had told this story many times over the years, but she told it again, knowing it brought him comfort. "I was frightened and overwhelmed. Everything was so different from what I had expected. And then there was chaos with that horse, and I saw this cowboy move through the crowd like he owned the world. You were so calm, so patient with that scared animal. When you looked up and our eyes met, I felt electricity run through me. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, but I knew even then that you were going to change my life." "Best day of my life," Kane said softly. "The train brought you west to marry a stranger, and I got to be the man who showed you that maybe you were not such a stranger after all. Not for long." "Not a stranger long," Olivia repeated, her voice breaking. "Promise me something," Kane said, taking her hand. "Promise me you will find joy again after I am gone. I do not want you spending the rest of your life mourning. We had something beautiful, Olivia, something rare. Honor that by living fully, by finding happiness in our children and grandchildren, by continuing to build and grow and thrive." "I promise to try," Olivia said. "That is all I can give you." "That is enough," Kane said, and they sat together as the snow continued to fall, blanketing the ranch in peaceful white. Kane died on a cold December night, with Olivia holding his hand and their children gathered around. His last words were, "I love you," directed at Olivia, and his last expression was peace. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half the county, a testament to the man Kane had been and the respect he had earned. William delivered a eulogy that had everyone weeping, talking about his father's integrity, kindness, and devotion to family. Rose spoke about how her father had taught her that women were just as capable as men, encouraging her education and career in a time when many fathers would have discouraged such ambitions. James, barely able to speak through his tears, simply said that his father had been his hero. Olivia stood by the grave, supported by her children, and felt as if part of her soul was being buried along with Kane's body. How did one continue when half of themselves was gone? But she had made him a promise, and Olivia Vaughn Jefferson was a woman who kept her promises. The first year was the hardest. Everything reminded her of Kane: the porch where they had sat together countless evenings, the bed they had shared for 32 years, the ranch he had built with his own hands. She would reach for him in the night and find only emptiness. She would start to tell him something before remembering he was not there to hear it. But slowly, gradually, Olivia found her way back to something resembling peace. She threw herself into her grandchildren, finding joy in their laughter and energy. She worked in her garden, which had always been her sanctuary. She volunteered at Rose's school, reading to children and mending their clothes when needed. She helped William with ranch accounts, her sharp mind and head for numbers making her invaluable. And every evening, she sat on the porch that Kane had built and watched the sunset, feeling his presence beside her even though he was gone. 10 years after Kane's death, on a warm spring day, Olivia's great-granddaughter asked her to tell the story of how she and great-grandpa Kane had met. "Did you really almost marry a different man?" 6-year-old Sarah asked, her eyes wide. "I did," Olivia confirmed. "I came all the way from Boston to marry a man I had never met. But then you met great-grandpa instead." "Yes. He saw me getting off the train and decided I deserved better than what I had chosen. He offered me a different option." "And you picked him even though you did not know him," Olivia smiled. "I picked him because somehow, even though we had just met, I felt like I did know him." like we were meant to find each other. That is romantic, Sarah said with a sigh. I want a love story like that someday. Then make sure you choose someone kind, Olivia advised. Someone who sees you as a partner, not a possession. Someone who makes you laugh and stands beside you when times are hard. Those are the things that matter, not how much money someone has or how handsome they are. Though Olivia had to admit, Cain had been handsome too, right up until the end. She lived 15 more years after Cain's death, long enough to see James become a respected lawyer in Sacramento, to attend the weddings of multiple grandchildren, and to hold her first great-great-grandchild. She remained sharp and active until nearly the end, still working in her garden at 82, still managing the household accounts, still telling stories of the old days to anyone who would listen. On a crisp October morning, similar to that day long ago when she and Cain had picnicked in the mountain meadow, Olivia woke feeling strange. She was 87 years old, and her body had been failing gradually for months, though her mind remained clear. William, who had moved back to the main house to care for her, found her sitting in her rocking chair on the porch, wrapped in a quilt, watching the sunrise paint the hills gold and orange. "Mama, you should be in bed," he chided gently. "I wanted to see the sunrise one more time," she said. "It is so beautiful." William sat beside her, this son who was now an old man himself, silver-haired and weathered like his father had been. "Are you in pain?" "No," Olivia said truthfully. "I feel peaceful, I feel ready." "Ready for what?" William asked, though she thought he knew. "To see your father again," Olivia said simply. "I miss him, William. Every day for 47 years I have missed him. I have had a good life, a full life, but a piece of me has been waiting to be reunited with him." William's eyes filled with tears, but he nodded. "He was a lucky man to have you." "I was lucky to have him," Olivia corrected. "The train brought me west to marry a stranger, but I found so much more. I found a partner, a love, a life beyond anything I could have imagined. Your father gave me that." She closed her eyes, and in her mind, she was 22 again, stepping off that train into the California heat, frightened and uncertain. She saw Cain across the platform, his green eyes meeting hers, and felt that jolt of recognition. She heard his voice, maybe not a stranger long. He had been right. They had not stayed strangers. They had become everything to each other. Olivia took one more breath, smelling pine and grass and the familiar scent of home, and then she was gone, her hand still warm in William's, a slight smile on her weathered face. They buried her beside Cain on a hillside overlooking the ranch they had built together. The funeral was enormous, attended by children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and even a few great-great-grandchildren, along with friends and neighbors and people whose lives had been touched by the quiet grace with which Olivia had lived. Rose delivered the eulogy, her voice strong despite her tears. "My mother taught us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward despite it. She was terrified when she came west, but she came anyway. She was frightened when a stranger offered her an alternative to the life she had planned, but she took the chance anyway. She built a life of meaning and purpose, not because it was easy, but because she had the courage to trust her heart." Years later, Olivia's great-great-great-granddaughter would research her family history and find old letters, faded photographs, and the story of an auburn-haired woman from Boston who traveled west to marry a stranger and instead found true love with a cowboy at a train station. She would write the story down, preserving it for future generations, making sure that people would know about the day a train brought Olivia Vaughn west, and how Cain Jefferson met her eyes and showed her that maybe she was not facing a stranger after all. Not for long, never for long. Because some love stories, the truest ones, begin with a single glance and last beyond a lifetime, echoing through the generations that follow. A testament to the courage it takes to trust your heart even when logic says you should not, and the rewards that come from choosing love over fear.